capacity of Emilio and you as well, Rob, in your capacity as AG. When bringing these actions against companies abroad, what kinds of issues have you had, if any, and I assume there have been some, in obtaining jurisdiction over these companies, in obtaining evidence from these companies, taking discovery? Now, I think this really goes to the point that Tiffany was making. As a practical matter, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And what problems have you had and how have you solved them?
Amelia, please go ahead, and then I'll speak to a little bit to Massachusetts and Washington.
Well, obviously, the process for serving companies abroad that don't have an agent for service here in the United States is a lengthy one under the Hague Convention. The Hague Convention lays down processes to follow for those states that are signatories, and in our case, both China and India are signatories. We've gone through that process in another case that precedes this one, and we're going through that process in this case. We're very confident that we can establish jurisdiction here, just as we've been confident that we could establish it in other cases. There are multiple means of establishing jurisdiction, both based on the volume of commerce and that's involved with these companies versus the United States, and also based on other ties that these companies may have with the United States as well, and specifically with California.
In Massachusetts, when you look at the case that the Attorney General there brought against a Thai seafood processor, we had products coming into Massachusetts from Thailand, and that was judged to be sufficient to establish jurisdiction. In Washington State, we never really reached that question because we based our letter to Embraer on evidence brought to us by the software vendor, and since we didn't actually get to the step of filing a lawsuit, we didn't worry so much about those particular legal issues, and just focused instead on the fact that we had pretty clear evidence that was never really denied when we finally got down to it, and were able to persuade the company to do the right thing. And you know, it's interesting because there you had a very prominent aircraft manufacturer. As I mentioned in my presentation, they're the fourth largest aircraft maker in the world, and I think they had some legitimate concern for reputational harm that would result if they fought this. And one thing about AGs is that in addition to having the power to issue subpoenas and file lawsuits, the AGs also command the bully pulpit. And when you're talking about companies that are concerned about their reputation in the American markets, you have some leverage there. So that can result in perhaps quicker action in some cases. Now, you could also have companies overseas where there's evidence that they're using stolen IT for a competitive advantage, who frankly couldn't give a hoot for their reputation in the United States. So you might have a tougher problem there. And in between those two types of companies, you can have companies that are pretty active in their home countries. I recall, Emilio, that in the case of California, the case that California brought, that at least one of the manufacturers involved went to their national government and went to their trade association in their own country complaining about the lawsuit and seeking some sort of assistance to try to fend it off. And last I heard, they've been unsuccessful in that effort. So it can become kind of interesting how the company overseas can react. But as Emilio pointed out, these laws and this type of case could be brought against a company based in the United States just as readily, in fact more easily, than a company overseas. And the way the AGs have been approaching these cases is that if they found evidence of stolen IT being used by an American manufacturer to gain a competitive advantage over its competitors, they would be ready to take action against those companies as well.